Washington Journal continues.
And now joining us on the Washington Journal is Bill Allison. He is the editorial director of the Sunlight Foundation, and he is here to talk about how foreign governments lobby in the U.S. Mr. Allison, how do foreign governments lobby in the U.S.?
Well, they lobby very much like any other special interest does. They hire Washington firms, lobbying firms, law firms, public relations firms, and then these agents of theirs are called foreign agents, go out and meet with members of Congress, they meet with administration officials, they put out position papers, they host conferences, and they do all the kinds of things that lobbyists would normally do for any U.S. company.
Well, which countries are spending the most right now on lobbying in the U.S.?
One of the problems with the way that they disclose this information is it's very hard to answer that question. We're actually just tallying up what was spent in 2010, so the most recent year we have is 2009. And the top spender that year, surprisingly enough, was the Cayman Islands. And the reason was, probably people don't remember this far back in the campaign, but early in 2008, when Barack Obama, senator from Illinois, was out on the stump, he would tell the story about something called Ugland House. And it was a building in the Cayman Islands where there were 12,000 corporations headquartered. And he said either that's the biggest building in the world or the biggest tax scam in the world. And so this caused Cayman Islands to hire a whole bunch of U.S. lobbyists and go to members of Congress and say that, no, we're not a tax scam country.
And so do you have an idea of how much the Grand Cayman government spent on lobbying the U.S. government?
It was about, in that year, it was around $7 million, a little bit more than that, yeah.
Okay. Who are some of the lobbyists that might be well known to the C-SPAN viewing public who do lobbying on behalf of foreign governments?
Not all of them are current, but if, for example, Bob Dole was a lobbyist for the government of Indonesia and was also hired by the United Arab Emirates in Dubai when we had the Dubai ports deal. Richard Gephardt, presidential candidate, minority leader of the House Democrats through the 90s, has represented foreign governments. Robert Livingston, very briefly, Speaker of the House or Speaker of the House designate, and after Newt Gingrich stepped down. He's lobbied for Egypt, for Libya, for all kinds of different governments. So these are very prominent former officials. And one thing which you know, is I think really surprising is that because there's all kinds of different issues that governments want to lobby on, one of the areas that's most heavily targeted is former U.S. trade representatives, people who worked as top trade negotiators for the United States. And back in the 1990s, Center for Public Integrity did a study and found that about 47% of ex-U.S. trade representatives went to work for foreign governments negotiating on their behalf for trade deals with the United States.
Well, in your list from 2009, the top spenders, the Cayman Islands we mentioned, then the United Arab Emirates, the Republic of Congo, Morocco, and the Bahamas. Let's start with the Republic of Congo. What are their issues of interest? Who are some of their lobbyists?
Republic of Congo, and it's actually Republic of Congo Brazzaville, has there's a investment idea that sprung up sometime in the last couple of years dubbed vulture funds. And what happens is a government that has defaulted on its debt, so the debt is basically worthless. They borrowed money from foreign banks, from aid officials, and they've defaulted on it. These vulture funds buy it up for pennies or fractions of a penny on the dollar. Then they go to U.S. court or international courts, and basically the U.S. is one of the best venues for it, apparently, to sue the foreign governments to try to recover some of the debt. And if they can get, 10 cents on the dollar or 5 cents on the dollar, it's a huge windfall for the vulture fund. And there's a group, Kensington International, which has done this, and they hired the Livingston Group, which is, again, Robert Livingston's lobbying firm, and the Loeffler Group, which is led by Thomas Loeffler, who was a campaign advisor to John McCain, among other things, in the 2008 election. And both of them have lobbied. And what's interesting is they've lobbied a lot of members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and they've gotten legislation introduced to stop these vulture funds from suing in U.S. courts. It hasn't passed at this point, but I think it shows how this is how a foreign country can get something into the U.S. legislative system by hiring these well-connected insiders who then lobby on their behalf.
Is it all legal?
It's all legal. I mean, the only thing you have to do is disclose. And it's fairly, Foreign Agent Registration Act, which was passed in 1938 because they're worried about, Congress at the time was worried about Nazi propaganda. Essentially, within 10 days of agreeing to represent a foreign principal, which is a foreign government, foreign political party, some foreign government-controlled organizations, they have to register and then disclose their activities. And unlike U.S. lobbying disclosures, they disclose far more information, that all of their contacts with members of Congress. They disclose if they talk to a reporter about a specific issue, that shows up. If they, any kind of information they disseminate, which used to be called propaganda, now is called informational matter, they have to disclose that and file copies of that with the Justice Department. So it's a real treasure trove of documents on how the system works.
Why is it so hard to find this research, though, or to dig into it?
Several reasons. One is, although they've just begun having some electronic disclosure, a lot of FARA forms are, some of them are handwritten documents still. Some of them are typed. They're these big, awkward, long forms. There's not really a standard way of presenting information, so some lobbying firms will list the actual lobbyist who has the contact, the date of the contact, the subject matter. Others won't list the name of the lobbyist. There's huge problems with standardizing names when we want to add up and see that, you know, for example, when we looked in 2009, Nancy Pelosi and her staff were contacted as much as anyone. But, you know, to identify all of those staffers, sometimes they're just in there by name, sometimes they're in there by, you know, to name the, it'll say that it's part of the speaker's staff, sometimes it'll say, but, you know, it's not always as accurate as it could be, too. So there's a whole lot of massaging we have to do to this to then make it available. But the Justice Department does have a website. It's FARA.gov, where you can look up the raw forms. It's a very balky search engine. It's very difficult to manipulate, but they are there.
And also on, at the Sunlight Foundation, you have a foreign lobbying tracking site.
Right. We have
foreignlobbying.org, correct?
Yes, foreignlobbying.org is where we put all of the digitized, where we make all of this stuff searchable, so you can stick in Nancy Pelosi's name and see all of the contacts. And we also have something on the reporting group site where we put up the latest disclosures from that go to the Department of Justice, and that's at reporting.sunlightfoundation.com.
Well, 202 is the area code if you would like to talk about foreign governments lobbying the U.S. 202 is our area code, 737-0002 for Democrats, 737-0001 for Republicans, 628-0205 for all others. Send the tweet, twitter.com/cspanwj, or an email, journal@cspan.org. Mr. Allison, with all the uprisings and going on in the Middle East, are the Libyan rebels, and there was an article this morning in USA Today, and of course I can't find it right now, the Libyan rebels are looking for foreign representation here in the U.S. Does Egypt have representation, Yemen, et cetera, Colonel Gaddafi?
Yes, the answer to all of that is yes. Right now, the Libyan rebels, for example, I think it's the Transitional National Council, they have hired the Harbor Group, which is an organization that is led by Richard Mintz, who's a former Clinton administration official. There actually, what's interesting is the Libyan ambassador, Ambassador Al-Juli, who has since left the Libyan government, he actually had to register as a foreign agent. Diplomats are exempt from registering under the act, but because the rebels have not been recognized, so he's registered as a foreign agent. We're still not up to date. I mean, a lot of times when governments change, and obviously Egypt is in flux, and as far as we know, the Livingston Group, Podesta Group are still representing the government of Egypt, and there has been much more of a transition there in the sense that you still have military figures. And what's interesting is Livingston Group and a lot of the foreign lobbyists for Egypt did a lot of work for the Egyptian military, introducing them to U.S. defense contractors and introducing them to government officials. And of course the Pentagon, there's a program that the U.S., essentially U.S. taxpayers buy military goods for the Egyptian military. So there were very close ties there, and I would assume that those ties will go on. But yes, you know, a lot of these countries do have foreign representation here. Who
is representing Colonel Gaddafi?
The Livingston Group, actually, is the ones who are representing him. And again, I'm not certain that that contract is, you know, we'll have to wait for their next disclosure to see if they're still representing him. And then there was another organization called the Monitor Group, which my colleague Paul Blumenthal broke the story. This was an organization, it's affiliated with Harvard Business School. They arranged all kinds of tours to Libya for intellectuals who would then come back and write pieces in the New Republic. Stephen Walt was one who did this. They never registered to lobby, and apparently in their agreement with the Libyan government they wrote, the Monitor Group is not a lobbying organization. But that, they were doing everything that a FARA agent has to do, and just a few days ago, in fact, it's still on the reporting group website at Sunlight, they filed an exhibit and an AB, which is the contract they have with the foreign government, and they are going to have to file. But for about 5 years, they didn't register and didn't disclose their activities.
How much representation does Pakistan have in this city?
Pakistan right now, their main lobbyist group is Lord Locke Strategies, and it has Mark Siegel, who's a former Carter administration official and Democratic Party operative, and he's been a very big lobbyist for Pakistan. They also have, in the past, they've used Ogilvy Public Relations. They've used there's some other firms that have represented them as well. When you look at Locke Lord, not only do they have Democrats, Harriet Miers, the former Bush administration, the ill-fated Supreme Court nominee, is registered as a foreign agent with them. So clearly Pakistan does have, and they've spent about $3 million over the last 3 years lobbying Washington.
Well, here's the article from USA Today. Libyan rebels, global players tap into D.C.'s PR power. And it says here that Locke Lord, that Bill Allison was referring to, earned $75,000 a month from Pakistan, according to Justice Department records. Mr. Allison, let's take some calls on foreign governments lobbying the U.S. Ron from Miami, you're on the air.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Allison, are you a Democrat or a Republican?
I'm an independent.
Okay. All right, I asked that question. What I want to know is, why are we giving away money to these other countries like Pakistan who's hiding bin Laden and the whole time? And, I think money should come home to help our people in our own country. That's one thing. The next issue is lobbying in our own country from big industries and corporations. Now, our Congress writes the laws on all this lobbying. Now, a man on C-SPAN, a reporter, he said he went through one thing. It took him 20 hours to get through one thing, find out when one congressman made. It says he had to go through 20 different things to find out. They hide it so well that you can't find out what they make.
To answer the foreign aid question, I mean, obviously that's been going to be a huge issue. A number of members of Congress have talked about aid to Pakistan, and this is why Pakistan will have U.S. lobbyists, working on their behalf and going to Capitol Hill and meeting with members of Congress and stressing, that Pakistan was an ally in the Cold War and it has strategic significance. And I won't try to rehearse all the arguments that they'll make, but but that is, what will be happening now. And, other countries lobby for aid heavily. Obviously, Egypt was one that did a lot of lobbying around aid issues. And, I think the key is, for voters is to, let your congressman know how you feel. I mean, that's, the great power that the American people have. On the lobbying and on members of Congress, I actually did some research looking at a member of Congress's land holdings. It took me weeks and weeks to get through it. The system of financial disclosure is broken, and one of the things that the Sunlight Foundation tries to do is to make better disclosures. We funded the Center for Responsive Politics to digitize all of the financial disclosure forms that members of Congress file and put them online at opensecrets.org, and it is a huge problem. And one of the things that Sunlight wants to do is to make disclosure much more digital, much more accessible to the American people.
The hippie tweets in, how tragic that the man most responsible for spurring Arab Spring, Private First Class Bradley Manning, is locked up by USA government in Leavenworth. I mentioned that tweet because of this article on your website at Sunlight Foundation. foreign agents lobbied on issues raised in WikiLeaks cables. What were those issues?
Well, I think the one that really stood out to us dealt with the situation in Honduras when they had when they removed President Zelaya. Some called it a coup, some called it a constitutional action. And the WikiLeaks cables, they do talk a lot about what had happened with that particular. There was from the U.S. ambassador there talking about how it was slam dunk that it was a coup. And you have foreign agents then contacting members of Congress and going to great lengths to persuade them that this was a constitutional, orderly transition of power, that all the legalities were followed. And it's just kind of interesting. And then Honduras did hire a number of foreign agents to represent them at that point. And there were a few other things that I think we referenced in that piece as well.
Next call for our guest, Bill Allison of the Sunlight Foundation, Fleming Island, Florida. Alan.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Allison. Though I'm 54 years old, I will address you as that. I just wanted to ask a question. Even though I'm a Democrat, I'm not a hypocrite. And my question, well, quick question is, with regards to stature, can you tell me, or do you have any idea of who the big players are, whether it be ex-Democratic or Republican, congressman, senator, what have you? One. Two, do you know what their average, how much these people actually bring in? And finally, even this is a partisan question, Dick Armey. Can you tell me where he falls in line? Because I know he's anti-government, but I believe he was a lobbyist at one time. I'll take your answers off the air. Thank you very much.
Sure. I think the answer to whether it's Republicans or Democrats is yes. If you look at these filings, there are plenty of people from both parties who have gone into, representing foreign governments. As I mentioned, you've got, folks like Richard Gephardt, you have folks like Bob Livingston, you have, Bob Dole. There are presidential candidates, there are senators, representatives, congressional staffers, administration officials. I mean, going through the FARA filings, you just find a lot of these folks. How much they make is something that we can't actually say. I mean, we do know how much in fees each firm gets, but how the firms actually compensate their partners and the lobbyists that work for them, that's something that we don't know. One of the things about the FARA filings, though, is that there's a form called a short form. We actually don't do anything with those, although we probably should digitize those as well. But each individual lobbyist has to file one of these. It's about a 2-page form, and they list all of the foreign agents that they work for, and they also list the compensation from that foreign entity that they're going to get over the period that they file the short form for. So that is one way that you can find out, at least for particular clients, what the fees are. But a lot of times these are just estimated, and it's not a hard and fast thing that you can say that this is how much they made. To get to the last question about Dick Armey, I know I haven't followed him as closely. I believe he was a registered lobbyist. I know he's involved with one of the groups that was a splinter from Americans for Prosperity. He's still very politically active, and if you can look him up if you want to see if he's a lobbyist at opensecrets.org.
Which is another one of your websites?
It's actually the Center for Responsive Politics, and Sunlight funds the Center for Responsive Politics, and we're huge fans of what they do.
You've named a lot of websites. We've named a lot of websites. What's the overall website? Is there a gateway website?
Boy, there should be. That's one of the things. And actually, probably, one place where you can find all of this data digitized and searchable, there's two. If you don't feel very technically sophisticated, there's influenceexplorer.com, which is a site Sunlight does that brings together a lot of the state campaign finance. I like to think of it as it's the site that my mom can use. And then the other one is transparencydata.com, which if you want to get into the data, download it, play around with it in a spreadsheet, you can use that.
According to the Foreign Agents Registration Act, it requires agents representing foreign entities that they register with the U.S. government. They must disclose their activities, receipts, and disbursements. It was enacted in 1938 in response to German propaganda pre-World War II. And according to the Sunlight Foundation in 2009, foreign countries hiring U.S. lobbyists, 328 foreign clients, $60 million in fees. Outreach to lawmakers, 2,000 phone calls, 9,000 emails, 3,000 face-to-face meetings, and the top spending countries, the Caymans, United Arab Emirates, Republic of Congo, Brazzaville, Morocco, and the Bahamas. 328 foreign clients. There's not that many countries in the world. Who else would?
Well, you also have political parties, and one of the things, if you look at the Afghanistan filings, a lot of the parties would have had U.S. representation. You also have organizations, and and some things, we should be clear about that. Not all 328 of those are necessarily governments trying to influence. I mean, like things like the Bahamas Tourism Bureau is in there because it's a government operation, and they have a Department of Tourism, and so they have to register when they do ads for the Bahamas. And I think that you'll find that there's a lot of sometimes I believe that there's a few British cities that have foreign agents. Japan has something called JETRO, the Japan External Trade Organization, which has offices all over the United States that all file as individual entities. You have JETRO Houston, JETRO New York. So that's what pushes it up beyond the number of countries.
Laurel, Maryland. William on our Republican line. You're on with Bill Allison of the Sunlight Foundation.
Thank you very much. My name is William Capps. I'm running for Senate in the state of Maryland. I find it very appalling that former elected officials are going to lobbyist firms representing foreign governments. I have no problem with foreign governments talking to our State Department on a one-on-one basis and talking to our elected officials, but I have a major problem with former elected officials utilizing their former positions, right, to influence this country that may not necessarily be in the best interest of the United States.
Mr. Allison.
Yeah, that's that's really what the conundrum is, and when you look at and obviously, I mean, one of the things I always think about lobbying is the reason that people hire lobbyists is because they're effective, and foreign governments do hire them to influence U.S. policy, and about the only thing you can do about it right now is disclose it. I mean, I don't know how. I'm certainly not an expert enough to say that how you would reform the system to prevent this, but the revolving door is a huge problem in Washington. In the trade arena, when we had NAFTA, when we had China most favored nation status, the MFN question of whether China would regularly be granted this as opposed to having to have a vote, or permanently granted this, whether having to have a vote. There were just a ton of lobbying around each of these issues, and it's the foreign governments hiring former members of Congress, former trade officials to do it for them. And I think that a lot of people aren't aware that this is going on. And I remember one of Bill Clinton's top advisors was somebody who came from a firm that did a lot of lobbying, Mickey Cantor, on NAFTA and other issues. And this is the kind of thing that I think when Americans find out, get really upset. Obviously, John McCain's campaign had a lot of people who were foreign agents, or several top-level people who had lobbied for foreign governments. And organizations like Sunlight, the best we can do is disclose it and try to make it as available as possible.
Raleigh, North Carolina. Natasha, Democrat. Please go ahead with your question or comment.
Hi, thank you so much for C-SPAN. I'm calling because I do agree with what the Republican gentleman said earlier. And also, I was wondering, do you find your work to be dangerous with so much money involved, with different foreign countries involved, with, you mentioned the 47% of people who had previously worked with the United States, so there's a lot of things at stake. Do you find your work to be dangerous?
No, I really don't find it to be dangerous, and I'll just briefly say I do meet with a lot of foreign journalists from time to time, and the U.S. is a very safe place to do this kind of work, and I'm very grateful for that. As far as the issue about the money and how much is spent on these folks and the 47 officials, I mean just the fact that you can document that, I think, shows that it's a pretty safe place to do this kind of work. And again, these are all disclosures required by U.S. law, and that's kind of the basis of our work.
Bill Allison, are the forms or the information, is it tough to find on purpose?
Boy, it used to be when I first started looking into this, which was when I was working for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I used to have to take a train down here and go to there's a little office in New York Avenue where they had all of the forms, and you'd go up there, and that was the only place to get them. Now they're online. I don't know that it's exactly, they certainly don't advertise it very well, and and again, one of the things that the Obama administration promised was a kind of ethics.gov website that would bring together a lot of the different kinds of disclosures. We would certainly argue that FARA filings under the Foreign Agent Registration Act should be part of that. We haven't seen that portal. In fairness to them, you asked me for one website that has all of Sunlight stuff, and I had to give you two. So, but I do think that the Justice Department has done a much better job at getting this information out to the public than it did in the past. They still have a long way to go. Having a really good electronic filing system so that we don't have to input all of this information by hand to get it digitized so people can search it would be useful. I think that the forms could be a lot better. I think they could give a lot more specificity in how they report information so that it's more consistent across each different foreign agent. As to, I don't think that they're, I don't know that they're hiding it, but again, I think they do a much better job of putting it out there.
Napa, Idaho. Rick on our Republican line. Good morning.
Top of the morning to you, sir. This is Rick Aitchison, retired Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Sir, I got some information that would really assist America in identifying the problems that we're having with foreign aid and foreign spending. Now, this is on the Internet. It's called the CRS Report for Congress. The title is Foreign Aid, an Introductory Overview for U.S. Programs and Policies, and it's updated April 15th to the year 2004, and the order code is 98-916. Now, if you go to pages 30 and 31, it will identify how much money the United States of America has put into foreign aid and foreign spending from 1946 till the year 2004, and it breaks down year by year by year, and this is into the billions of dollars. I have 2 points to make. One, if you remember Hurricane Katrina, you have to ask yourself a simple question: who paid for that? The Americans did, and the insurance companies did. And throughout our history, we have provided the world with a lot of our money, but not one country in this world came to our aid in assisting us in our dilemma. Now we have another dilemma. We've got the floods in the Mississippi. So here's my point, 2 points. If we were to add up all the foreign aid and all the foreign spending updated till 2004, me and my attorney, we sat down and did this, we could actually reduce our national deficit, and we would have a deficit today, as of midnight last night, of about maybe $2.5 billion. And the other point that I'm going to make is if we were to take that money from foreign aid and foreign spending due to our insufficient funds, and we put it into our own nation's needs, because right now we're dealing with the floods in
all right, Rick, we gotta speed this up. Gotta wrap it up.
The point is, if we suspend foreign aid and foreign spending due to insufficient funds, we can reduce our national deficit.
All right, we got that point. Thank you, Rick. Bill Allison, any comment for that caller?
The only thing, I mean, foreign aid really is a tiny portion of the federal budget. It's not a huge line item. That being said, I mean, I think that people can ask, legitimate questions about where it's going and how it's being spent. But with the deficit is in trillions, and foreign aid really amounts to tens of billions. It is not a huge line item.
Beckley, West Virginia. Richard, independent line. We're talking with Bill Allison of the Sunlight Foundation about how foreign governments lobby the U.S. You with us, Richard?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I was just wondering why it is that we're throwing so much money away across seas when the people in the United States has trouble with making it because of gas prices, driving the cost of food up, driving the cost of trucking up, driving the cost of everything up.
All right, not quite what we're talking about, but Mr. Allison, can you see a correlation between aid going to certain countries and the number of lobbyists or who they've hired?
You definitely can, and I think that this is the point about the foreign lobbying is that so much of the foreign lobbying, aid is a huge issue, and for the countries that do get aid, it's something that it always shows up in their FARA disclosures. You see that just the Libyan rebels right now are asking for $1 billion. Last I heard, and I think that and I'm sure that the Harbor Group will be raising this with members of Congress. The Harbor Group, I should mention, is actually representing them pro bono right now, not charging fees for the rebels. But this is what you generally see is that when these countries do need U.S. aid, One of the ways to do it is to hire these former members of Congress, former government officials who have access to decision makers and advocate for increasing aid packages.
Next call for Bill Allison comes from Norwalk, Connecticut. Go ahead, Norwalk.
Hi, how you doing? Yeah, a couple of points came up to me. Number one, this aid to Pakistan, and basically, I want to just turn around and go to Libya for a minute. And I understand people want to be free, and so they want the United States help with, freedom and all that stuff. But you know what? I notice also these countries in the Middle East are not helping their own women. When a woman is sexually assaulted, she doesn't seem to get any kind of aid from her own country. They actually accuse the person that's been assaulted instead of the people that have assaulted that person.
You know what? We're getting a little bit off topic here. Can you tell me, Bill Allison, did Saddam Hussein have a lobbyist here in the U.S.?
Actually, he did, and there was a guy by the name of Edward von Kloberg, who's now deceased, who was, I think, Spy Magazine which was a publication that was around in the early, I think, 80s, early 90s, spoofed him by pretending to be a group that wanted to reconquer, I think a German group that wanted to reconquer Poland and all this other stuff, and asked if he would represent them, and he, sent them a letter saying that he did, or he would, and he was the only lobbyist who bid at this, and they did this expose of the world's, I don't know, worst lobbyist or something like that, or sleaziest lobbyist, and he actually had the article framed and kept it in his office. And he represented Saddam Hussein briefly and a whole bunch of other, he basically specialized in dictators and, would move from one dictator to the other.
Now, some of our allies are not on here. Saudi Arabia, Israel, at least on the top 5. France, Canada, Mexico. Do they have strong lobbying efforts as well? And China.
Right. It depends on, at times they do. And to give an example, when we were considering NAFTA, Mexico was spending a fortune on U.S. lobbying. But countries that are friends or do have longer standing ties to the United States or have bigger budgets for bigger U.S. Embassies and missions, they have, their diplomats and their diplomatic corps can establish the kinds of relationships with U.S. representatives and, members of Congress. They know the political players, and they can get in the door, and they don't necessarily need the foreign agents. And it's funny, when I was talking to a representative of the Cayman Islands, he explained the reason that they were hiring lobbyists, that because they're a crown colony and they're not they don't have their own independent mission here. The only way they can get access to U.S. officials is to essentially rent a diplomatic corps, and the people they rent are former U.S. government officials. So, so that's kind of how this system works, and this is why you don't find France. Although the Saudis do spend a lot of money on public relations, and they're not in the top 10, but they're probably in our top 20.
And the PR aspect is not reported here in the lobby.
Actually, the public relations, when they've hired, particularly after September 11th.
Any money spent because of FARA, because of the law?
Exactly. And remember that the law, the main purpose of it was to track propaganda. Now, it also tracks, they also report on political activities, which we're actually much more interested in than the propaganda, but you can get both of them.
Joe is a Republican in Pleasanton, California. Go ahead, Joe. Joe, you with us?
You saying Joe?
I'm saying Joe.
Okay. There was an issue raised about people, how difficult it is to find anything. To me, that is deliberate. All this stuff is vague, so the general public does not know everything that our elected officials are doing.
In a broad sense, I really agree with the caller. I think that government has gotten better at disclosure, but in some, it used to be that all of these disclosure is basically how we keep Congress honest. It's supposed to help us with the executive branch. And the only place you get these disclosures is if you came to Washington and went to some basement somewhere and went through filing cabinets or looked on, computer monitors. And now all of this stuff is online and available, or a lot of it is. And one of the big purposes of the Sunlight Foundation is to make that information more accessible to the American people. And but I do think government could do a much better job. But it has made some advances, and again, I don't think that they're trying to hide FARA, and I think that FARA has gotten a lot better, I should add. But at the same time, obviously, they could do a much better job than they're doing.
And this tweet from Real KSA for Liberty: how is it right or even lawful for any of these sellout middlemen to lobby on behalf of those other than American citizens?
The First Amendment protects the right to petition the government for the redress of grievances. So I think it's covered under that. Foreign governments, the United States abroad hires, native citizens to work in our consulates and embassies, or foreign citizens to work there. I think that I agree with the outrage of it, and particularly when you see like a former U.S. official who goes and negotiates a much better trade deal for a foreign country that ends up costing U.S. workers jobs, or there's a lot of that has been documented in the past. And as far as how you fix that system, and I certainly am not a policy guy, but I think that it is important for the American people to know about it, and then that can lead to a discussion about how you address these things.
Well, Bill Allison is the editorial director of the Sunlight Foundation and an investigative journalist there as well. Prior, he worked for the Center for Public Integrity for 9 years. In fact, he's the co-author of The Cheating of America with Charles Lewis. He's a senior editor of The Buying of the President 2000, co-editor of the New York Times bestseller The Buying of the President 2004, and he worked for 8 years for the Philadelphia Inquirer. The last 2 is researcher for Pulitzer Prize. Once again, the website, best website, you get one. You get one. You get a name one. Gateway website.
SunlightFoundation.com.
And they'll be able to somehow track a lot of these different places from there. Okay. Bill Allison, thank you for being in the Washington Journal.
Thank you for having me.